Steve makes the call.
No, our clothes and stuff are really good for, you know, like...
They're buying, like, better shirts than the shirt itself is good?
But also, like, the hoodies and stuff are cool, like, they have sweatpants and...
Opportunity. Squeeze away. How's your mood? You don't want to act out of turn, do you? 22.
No lie. Triton swag is strong. Steve has made it 22,000 with kings. Keating going to come along for the ride. And this might bring in more players. Texas Mike calls. Duan's going to almost definitely call with fives. What does Thomas do?
No.
He calls as well. Five-way action with kings. Pot's already $112,000.
In this episode of Weekly Poker Hand, we are playing 500, 1,000, 2,000 on Hustler Casino Live. It's a big game. We're playing about $900,000 deep effective. Pretty big game. In this hand, Texas Mike raises it up to $4,000 in the hijack with Queen 9 of Hearts. Tom Duan in the cutoff calls with pocket fives. Thomas on the button calls with 8 of clubs, 7 of diamonds. And then Steve in the small blind makes it 22,000. That may sound like a lot of money, but in a loose, splashy, battly Hustler Casino Live game, you're going to want to make it even bigger, especially when you're playing super duper deep stacked, because you want to do everything you possibly can to cut off your opponent's implied odds from out of position. This is a spot where in this game versus a raise and 2 callers, I would have made it something like 36,000. That may sound egregiously big, but if you make it 22,000, I guarantee you, everyone's going to call you every single time, and then you're going to have to play your kings out of position against 3 decent hands, and you don't really know which cards you have to fade. So, you want to go even bigger to get the pot heads up to the best of your ability, or just pick it up pre-flop. Anyway, Alan Keating calls cold with ace 3 of hearts in the big blind, and then everybody else calls too, as expected. Let's go to the flop.
Says you have to be able to get away from the big hand.
Thomas open-ended. Pair of 9s for Texas Mike. Duan with 5s. Steve still in the lead with kings. Texas Mike has bet 56,000. Thomas makes the call.
Maybe I could get one pass from the chat mafia if I let this hand go? No, they won't let me.
Steve makes the call. Pot now 280,000. 3 players still involved.
The flop comes 10 of hearts, 9 of clubs, 4 of clubs. If you have studied multi-way pots at all, you should know that 10 high connected flops are not good for the pre-flop re-raiser at all in general, because a lot of the pre-flop raisers and callers of the 3-bet will have a whole lot of hands that connect really well with the 10 and the 9. Steve opts to check with the pocket kings. Even though he is ahead in this scenario, this is a great play. He checks. Alan Keating with a backdoor flush draw checks, and then Texas Mike decides to bet 56,000 into the 112,000 pot, with 2 players yet to act behind him. If he was on the button or last to act in general in this scenario, I think this bet would be okay. But with 2 players yet to act, he probably just needs to check. Because if he bets and gets called or bets and gets raised, it's just not great. Anyway, he goes 56,000. Tom Duan with pocket fives gets out of the way. Thomas, with the bad end of the open-ended straight draw, decides to call. And Steve calls too with the pocket kings. Now, I will say that against the bet and the call from Texas Mike, who is loose and splashy and battly, and Thomas, who is also loose and splashy and battly, you may just want to raise and get all the money in with pocket kings. That sounds really dicey in general, normally when you're playing this incredibly deep stacked, but against these 2 players in this particular game who are kind of going crazy, that just might be the best play. Anyway, he decides to call, even though there are a million bad turns cards that can come. Alan Keating gets out of the way, by the way. Let's go to the turn.
That is a beautiful blank if you're Steve. He bet 1,000. Did he really just do that? He bet 1K.
You guys.
The turn is the 2 of spades, a total brick, and Steve, with his pocket kings, decides to bet $1,000. I don't really like this play. while it is nice for it to go check, 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 you have to realize that turn 2 of spades is actually really, really, really good for Steve because all the draws missed, and none of the made hands, such as a 10 or maybe even a 9, will fold to a bigger bet. Now, I would not have bet anything in this scenario, but if you are going to bet in the spot for value/protection, you need to bet a little bit bigger than 1/280th of the pot to get protection. Texas Mike opts to call. Thomas opts to call. Let's head to the river.
Have you been reading my book?
And there you go. Thomas has just made the straight. I mean, you gave Thomas 282 to 1 on his money. I think it was irresistible.
The river is the Jack of Clubs, one of the disastrous cards for Steve because Thomas just made the straight. Steve checks. Texas Mike with his junky pair checks. And then Thomas, with a straight, bets $130,000 into the $280,000 pot. Let's see if Steve makes the hero call.
Call.
Steve makes the call.
Steve can't find the fold with the pocket kings, and Thomas is going to scoop a $543,000 pot.
I didn't hear what you said. Oh, okay.
Alan,
Whoa.
you know 25K chips?
Thomas folded. I'm not sure if he misread his hand.
Should I feel slighted?
Actually, I was wrong. Somehow Thomas with the straight does not scoop this pot because he mucked his hand. And Steve, with the worse hand, gets the pot instead. Wild stuff. What I want to know is what is the worst mistake you have ever made at the poker table? Take a second, think about it. Let me know in the comments section down below. Click the like and subscribe button while you're down there, and I'll come back and tell you one of my worst mistakes.
Or he thought he was bluffing? Clearly he thought he was bluffing because he pointed to his
No, I got it.
opponent right away.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
What just
Probably
happened?
don't know this about really high stakes players.
Yeah.
But we wear fanny packs.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. I don't qualify.
It's not a good look for our game, Steve. It's not a good look for anybody in the whole world. He's the only one in Chicago that's doing it, I swear.
You're from Chicago?
Yeah.
Wow, so
Slide the feet,
I imagine
Fanny pack anymore. But somehow
Thomas
they keep
thought he was bluffing clubs and was so hyper-fixated on the clubs and the fact that he was trying to represent that,
Is it on me?
he forgot that he actually had the straight.
I was still daydreaming about the hand I won. I was just so happy replaying how good I was, you know.
He has no idea right now because the second
fanny packs are better than
Steve said call,
like fancy bags that people
Thomas pointed to him and said, "You're good."
you don't have to deal with the stress.
Wow.
No, I understand the merits
But
of
I
it.
don't think anybody's buying into my fashion sense for that. Literally anybody.
So just for the record, that was a $130,000 bet and a call into a pot of about $230,000. We're looking at a pot that was just slightly lower than $500,000. I'll ask the chat. If you're a poker player, at some point, you've thrown away the winner.
As a commentator said, if you've played a lot of poker, you've probably mucked the winning hand. The thing is that you probably didn't do it on a televised game, and you probably don't even know you did it. One time, one of the greatest players who ever lived, Phil Ivey, did this on a televised game. If Phil Ivey's doing it, you're probably doing it too. Do I think I've ever mucked the winning hand? I certainly don't know it if I did, but I bet I probably did. I'm trying to think of what my biggest mistake I've ever made at the poker table was, and actually, I don't know. But a big mistake I did make, that I know I made, is I ran a triple barrel bluff against my opponent without realizing there was another opponent in the pot. I bet the flop, my opponent called. I bet the turn, my opponent called. I bet the river, my opponent folded. I went to muck my hand, and then someone else said, "Wait a minute, I'm still in the pot." I kept a good poker face, though. I immediately knew my error, but I kept the good poker face, and after a lot of thought, my opponent folded. So even though I made a gigantic blunder, it worked out. I'm a pretty lucky player. I'll talk to you next time.